Welcome to Let's Get Real on KNEW Talk 910. I'm your host, Allin Taylor, and I'll be with you for the next hour. I have the funny, smart, and wonderful Ken Ray producing the show, as usual. And let me tell you, we have a great show tonight. I've really been looking forward to this. In studio, we have a very special guest, John Wheeler, author of Awakening to the Natural State. And he's going to be here all hour to share his understanding with us. But it's not about the words with John. His approach goes straight to the heart of the matter. It's not about another practice to learn. It's not about quieting the mind. John simply points in very simple terms to the truth of who you are, your natural state, and invites you to look for yourself. His style is refreshingly free of mystical trappings. This is one down-to-earth, guy-next-door kind of guy. And yet, I think it will be clear to you from hearing him talk that his true being shines through him effortlessly, and he exemplifies that this truth is for each and every one of us. This is the truth for each and every one of us. John is currently hosting weekly talks in Santa Cruz, and I'll give you all the information on how to go see him in person. And I warn you, what he's doing is contagious, so if you're ready, go see John. You might just have a pleasant surprise. You can call us here during the hour, 1-800-490-0058. If you'd like to ask John a question tonight, please feel free to call. We'd love to hear from you. 1-800-490-0058. And if you go to my website, www.allintaylor.com, that's ALLINTAYLOR.com, right on my homepage, you'll find links to John's website and to his book, so you can check him out while we take this quick break, and we'll be right back with John Wheeler. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Let's Get Real on KNEW Talk 910. I'm your host, Allin Taylor. My website is www.allintaylor.com, ALLINTAYLOR.com. You can go on there right now and find out about John Wheeler, who we have in the studio tonight. The phone number, if you want to ask John a question, 1-800-490-0058. John is the author of Awakening to the Natural State. John had been on a spiritual path for about 30 years, trying out every practice you can think of, looking for what we're all looking for, the truth and an end to suffering. John resonated most with the teachings of Nisargadatta Maharaj, a teacher in the tradition of non-dual spirituality. And John became very well versed in this tradition, but underneath the suffering was still there, and he felt that he really didn't fully understand what his teachers were pointing to. The books had done their job, and now he wanted to meet someone face-to-face who could perhaps clear his mind of doubt and end the search once and for all. Knowing that he couldn't meet face-to-face with Nisargadatta, who died in 1981, John went looking for someone who studied with Nisargadatta, and this search led in 2003 to sailor Bob Adamson, a straight-talking Australian who had been shown the truth by Nisargadatta back in the 1970s. John had met many other teachers, but there was something about Bob. John was convinced he was dealing with someone who had realized his true nature because he could see firsthand the vitality, the confidence, and the energy of the understanding. In very short order, John got his doubts cleared up and saw what Sailor Bob and Nisargadatta had been pointing to, his own true nature. John was most struck with the simplicity of what is being pointed at. So simple, he says, that most of us miss it. So now John shares with others what he has learned in his book, Awakening to the Natural State, on his website, which you can link to through my website, and in his weekly talks in Santa Cruz and in public forums like this show. We're very fortunate to have him here as a guest tonight. John Wheeler, welcome to Let's Get Real.
Thank you, Allin. It's good to be on the show.
Wonderful. In the book you said, 15 years of meditating could not accomplish what occurred in a few moments of direct looking. What exactly is direct looking, and how do we do it, and how are we not doing that now?
Well, I think the first thing is to get a clear understanding of what these books are talking about. So, as you had mentioned, I had been reading and searching and looking into spirituality for a long time. And I had an intuition or a feeling that there was something that these teachers were pointing to that possibly held the key to understanding or to freedom. And yet, I think as I look back, I realized that what that was and what they were pointing to was not precisely clear. And as I recall, when I went to Australia to talk to Sailor Bob Adamson, the very first thing he asked me was, do I understand or do I know what these teachings are pointing to? And I realized that while I had an intellectual acquaintance with a lot of these concepts that you hear about, that the knowledge or the first-hand, really direct understanding was still something that I was groping for and wanting to understand for myself. And so what I came to see when I was there with Bob was that what we're looking for has nothing to do with concepts. It has nothing to do with the intellect, really. It has nothing to do with non-dual verbiage. It has to do with discovering something that's real and something that's present and something that is within us that we have been overlooking. And so Bob very quickly got me onto this, pointed me back to this looking for what is present and what is available within us, not as a concept, not as an idea, but as an actual direct experience. And so when I talk about the difference between, looking in the mind or thinking about things versus direct experience, I'm trying to kind of articulate this approach to things.
So it's that the direct looking is not looking in the mind, it's direct looking into our own true nature.
Yeah, so the key question of all of these philosophies and teachings is, who are you? And you'll see this throughout Indian spirituality and in Buddhism and in Western philosophy. The key question is, who am I? Or self-knowledge. And so what I saw in looking and reading the lives of different teachers and sages and saints was that people talked about having a very direct understanding of who they are, and that being the kind of master key that allowed them to discover the freedom and the understanding that they had been searching for. So the key question of all this is, what is my true nature and who am I? And what you discover is that's not a matter of thinking about, it's not a matter of conceptualizing, it's a matter of truly stopping, looking in our direct experience to deeply probe into this question, who am I, what's my true nature? And the interesting thing is you discover you cannot use the mind. You cannot, your being, your true nature, is not a thought, it's not a concept. So it turns out the mind is not the right tool for looking. And so that was another thing that I heard Sailor Bob talk about quite a bit, is the answer is not in the mind.
Well, what is there besides the mind? There are two things that come up to me that I'm thinking. One is, well, what do you mean, who am I? This is who I am. I'm Allin, and I'm this flesh and blood, and I know who I am. What do you mean, question who I am? And then, what do you mean the answer is cannot be found in my mind? Everything I know is in my mind. Could you address those kinds of issues?
Yeah, a lot of what we experience actually it's true that a lot of what we know and how we experience things are in the mind. The language and the memories and the identity that we've picked up over the years. A lot of these things are, in fact, sustained and kind of built up in the thinking process. And yet there's a lot of our life and a lot of our living that is not coming through that way. And you can, at a very basic level, it's like right now we're sitting here and we're perceiving and sensing and feeling, and things are coming in. There's registering and there's knowing of a lot of things. And a large majority of that is actually not coming through the conceptualizing process. It's just direct experience. It's non-conceptual experience. So it's not really true that everything that we experience is coming through this kind of intellectual process. But, the most vital question is this question of what is my true nature, because we all know that we exist. We all know that we are present and aware. And so you begin to probe into that and to look to see what that is. And again, it's not a process of thinking about it. It's a process of really asking yourself genuinely that question, and simply looking to discover who am I and what is present, what is aware.
Well, and a lot of who am I, when you start going after the answer to that question, turns out to be, well, it turns out I'm not that, and I'm not this other thing, and you start thinking, well, I have all these memories of my past, but then when you try to decide, well, what's a memory? And it just is vapor. There seems to be sort of nothing there. So is that sort of where we go when we're asking? I'm something in the book you said was you need to put some solid inquiry into the question, who am I? You need to do the homework, cover the basics. Will you talk to us a little bit about what those basics are?
Yeah, well, to me, there's a couple of, there's a couple of ways to kind of approach this. One is kind of looking into the things that we're not, and then the other side is looking into the things that we are. And so with a little bit of looking, you start to discover things like the thoughts that we have come and go. They're constantly changing. The thoughts of a lifetime are completely gone in this present moment, and yet we are tangibly present. We are tangibly aware. And so this ever-changing flux of thoughts is not truly our essence, because if it was, it would be with us at all times, and it's just simply not in our experience. So this, you start to get a little bit of a sense of, that's not what I am. And you can look at the emotions, you can look at the body, you can look at the perceptions, and you can start to see how those are constantly changing and arising and appearing, and yet there's something about our true nature that remains straight through. And what's that? If it's not the body, it's not the mind, it's not the senses, it's not the changing experiences, and yet we know without any doubt that there is something that has been with us right from the day we were born and stays with us at each and every moment. And so then the question can start to turn into, well, what's that? If I'm not those things. And that's kind of what I would call the positive side of, well, we see now these things that we're not, and so what are we? And it comes back to, just to kind of jump right to the core of that, we know that we exist, and we know that we're aware. And it turns out when you begin to look into that, those things are what stays with us. Is
it really that simple? I mean, I think we all know that feeling of, yeah, I'm here, I exist. This is always. This doesn't change with my mood, or I think we all know that. But is it really that simple? Is it that simple? That that's.
Well, I can tell you that.
It?
Yeah, when I met Sailor Bob, again, that was the first question that he asked me about. Do I really know for myself what these teachers like Nisargadatta, what they're actually pointing to? Now, when I was sitting with a man like that, I mean, he was a student of Nisargadatta. He had studied with that teacher. I felt like, well, if anybody can talk with some authority about this, he can. And so I was all ears at that point, because I knew that I didn't truly know. I knew the concepts. I knew what I had read. I had some theories, some intuitions about what this might be. So, we dialogued just for a few minutes, and he asked me, "Are you present? Do you exist right now?" I said, "Yes." "Are you aware right now?" "Yes." He said, "Any doubt about that?" "Absolutely not." And he stopped and he said, "That's it. That's precisely what Nisargadatta is pointing to. It's this very simple sense of presence and awareness.
It's too easy to overlook.
And he said to me at that point, he said, most people overlook this not because it's difficult, but because it's so simple.
Wow.
And so that began to change my whole, over those many decades, my attention was wandering out into the spirituality and into the books and into the rituals and into the teachers and into the meditation, and yet the core thing about what's the most important thing is knowing truly who I am was kind of fading into the background.
Because all the mental activity tends to force it into the background.
And being able to sit there face to face with somebody who could really talk about this from their firsthand experience was able to refocus things back to the core question. And so then you start to get a feeling of this sense of presence and awareness that stays right with us may be in fact what we are. And then you stop and you start to look into that and you start to discover some really amazing things about this. How it's always with us, how it's always going on, whether the thoughts are there or not, whether the emotions are coming. And even when in states of confusion and doubt and suffering and spiritual highs and lows, there's this background basic principle there, and we've been overlooking that.
And this is what you're pointing at when you say that it's so simple and this is your natural state. That when we're traipsing around going after this practice or that practice and reading a million books and saying, I want to become enlightened and I just am desperate to be enlightened, all it is a simple looking at what you're talking about
Returning
right
back,
now.
yeah, to see who you
That
are.
is so simple.
Now, many of us, we haven't had this pointed out. We as I say sometimes, when we were growing up, we weren't sitting around, at the dinner table, and our parents weren't saying things like, "Did you know that you are the principle of awareness and you're inherently free?" So we haven't heard that. So we spent a lifetime with all kinds of interesting ideas and pursuing things, and yet what you discover is those things have been taking us precisely away from the answer. So when you're off searching for enlightenment in the future and practicing and reading and accumulating concepts and spiritual techniques and verbiage and all this kind of thing, you're activating the mind and you're putting a lot of focus on the mind, and yet the very simple question of who am I is somehow falling to the background. And so that was the value of being with someone and talking about it face to face, is that to get pointed back very clearly to the main and central question.
You're listening to Let's Get Real on Talk 910 KNEW. I'm Allin Taylor, and we're talking to John Wheeler, author of Awakening to the Natural State. And we have an extra surprise at the bottom of the hour. You'll have to stay tuned and see. But after the bottom of the hour break, we have a little extra surprise with John. John, you write... please give us a call here if you'd like to ask John a question, 1-800-490-0058. You write, even if your current thought patterns never change, you can still be free. How is that so?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because I can speak from my experience. I'm sure people listening can identify with, when we get into spirituality, oftentimes we conceive of that as being stilling the mind or purifying the mind or doing something with the mind and body. And it turns out, amazingly, from the perspective of this non-dual pointing, it has very little, or if anything, to do with that. Because, as I was saying, these thoughts are coming and going, and yet this true nature that we are remains as this kind of baseline, kind of background presence. And the whole essence of this is just deeply understanding and looking into that. So to be looking back at the mind and trying to sort things out in the mind and get the mind to be pure and harmonious and all these kinds of things is essentially emphasizing the mind and saying that this truth or this reality is somehow has to do with the way that this mind is appearing. And so it's a very simple kind of mistake, because to turn and to begin to investigate and recognize who you are, you actually don't have to do anything with the mind at all. And so one analogy that comes up often is, if you have the sun shining on clouds, a lot of people in spirituality, they will think, like, if let's say that the clouds represent the thought processes. A lot of people will say, well, when all the thoughts are still, I can see the sun, or when the clouds are perfectly aligned, then I can see the sun. Well, it turns out, though, that what this teaching is saying is that you are the sun, and the sun does not need the clouds to be a certain way. It can simply recognize its own nature, and from the position of the sun, the clouds never get in the way. And so the reason that, once it's clear what is being pointed out and that our true nature is what we're looking at here, you realize that just as the sun does not need to get rid of the clouds, so we do not have to, get rid of the thoughts or purify the thoughts to understand who we are.
Well, speaking of having a bigger perspective, or the perspective of the sun, I really feel like I should at least mention what's going on in the country today with the disaster in the Gulf Coast, and, of course, talking a lot about all these people and their suffering, and obviously there's real experience of suffering going on, and I just wonder if you could shed a little light on maybe a different perspective on that tragedy, or I mean, and to extrapolate about any tragedy or any suffering all over the planet, or even our own suffering. How do we view this? How do we view this kind of suffering?
Well, I found in my experience, I mean, a lot of people are interested in suffering and resolving suffering, and we feel and see the suffering in others, and there's a compassion to help with that. I kind of take it back, and I think, just to say, I mean, obviously, there's a natural human compassion and response to the world around us, and to our children, and to our parents, and our friends, and to our community, and so that comes up, and that happens kind of spontaneously. But in terms of the deeper question of suffering, and why do people suffer, and how is that alleviated, to me it really implies that we all look into ourselves and truly understand what suffering is, and also experience the freedom from suffering within ourselves. It's hard to convey something or share something or truly with your heart and with your just full experience if something without having that experience. And so I think it calls us to look deeper and to make sure that we truly understand suffering.
That it kind of has to start here.
Yeah. In other words, how can you help somebody truly get beyond human suffering without understanding what it is to be beyond human suffering, or to really deeply understand it? So it kind of, to me, it calls us back to making sure that we understand that for ourselves. And I remember Bob Adamson told a story. He went to Nisargadatta and said, "How can he help others?" Which is a beautiful statement to make. And he was told, in order to put others beyond the need of further help, you yourself must be beyond the need of further help.
We're going to take a quick break here, and after the bottom of the hour, John is going to sing a song. He writes songs and sings, and he brought his guitar, and it's going to be really something. He plays very well, and he's going to sing a song that he wrote about Sailor Bob Adamson. So you're listening to Let's Get Real. I'm Allin Taylor. Give us a call, 1-800-490-0058. We'll be right back. You're listening to Let's Get Real on KNEW Talk 910. I'm your host, Allin Taylor, and the phone number here is 1-800-490-0058. We have John Wheeler in studio with us tonight, which is really a treat, and he is the author of Awakening to the Natural State. You can link to his website and to his book if you go to my website, www.allintaylor.com. That's ALLINTAYLOR.com. I have a link right on my homepage to John's website. He's got wonderful stuff on his website, a lot of writings and links and articles. And John is a wonderful singer and songwriter, and he brought his guitar in today, and he's going to sing us a song that he wrote about Sailor Bob. John, would you like to tell us a little bit about this song?
Yeah, sure. I was over in Melbourne, Australia, visiting Bob Adamson for a few weeks, and when I got back, my life had substantially changed. My seeking and my questions and my doubts and were just thoroughly addressed in such a way that I came back really not feeling like I was seeking and had many questions after that. And it was just really amazing, and I didn't expect that. I had been at it so long that the idea of being a spiritual seeker and always having doubts just seemed to be the way that it would always be. And
John, I think a lot of people listening right now can really relate to that. We're just so used to the seeking, we think it's always the way it's got to be, and it isn't. And
the good news that Nisargadatta shared and that Bob shares and other people is that the seeking and the suffering and the doubts can end, and that's what they've been saying all along. So when I got back from Australia, I play a little bit of music, and something kind of bubbled up to try to capture some of the teachings and some of the things that had been pointed out, and just a way of kind of crystallizing that experience. And I had the fortune a few years later of going over again, and I was able to sing this for Bob, and he kind of got a kick out of it. So he may be out there listening to this, so I'd like to say just kind of dedicate this one to Bob, and to say thank you for the teaching that was pointed out, and of course, I could never really forget that. But let me sing this song as a way of trying to share a little bit about what that was for me. And we can talk about it afterwards, too.
Great.
Okay. Right here, right now, something is shining. Right now, right here, it's all very clear. You can see the sights, you can hear the sounds, you can feel the world all around. Right where you are, something is knowing. From there, all things are freely flowing. You just watch the thoughts and feelings floating by. They are only clouds, but you're the empty sky. What's wrong with right now? Unless you think about it. I got it from an old sailor bobbing along. What we're seeking is not very far. Present awareness is what you already are. That is ever fresh, untouched in any way. Know yourself as this, and every problem slips away. So what's wrong with right now? Unless you think about it. I got it from an old sailor bobbing along. What's wrong with right now? Unless you think about it.
John, thank you. That was really, really well done. A wonderful, wonderful song. Thank you so much. And that's the first time we've ever done live music on this show. We might have to do it some more. Thank you. That was really, really beautiful.
Happy to.
Well, we were just talking, you and I, just a minute ago about what is the source of suffering. And we were, I was thinking of something that Ken and I were talking about last week. Ken, my producer, who really came up with some great questions last week, and I said, well, thank goodness John Wheeler's coming in next week because he can answer these questions for us. But it kind of touches into that same idea of what's the source of suffering. Ken was just saying, we're so used to we're so accustomed to thinking that the fulfillment to what we want is out there, and after a whole lifetime of that, how do we stop doing that? How do we stop thinking that it's out there and looking out there for our fulfillment after doing that our whole lives?
Yeah, well, we've built up a lifetime of habits, but what happens for a lot of us is it starts to dawn on us that it's not working. We spend a lot of time looking outward and trying to find the happiness and the peace and the security, and it starts to dawn for many of us that we're simply not finding it. And that can, lead to, trying different things and looking for answers. And but the crisp answer on that is it's kind of like if you're standing in front of a painted door and you think that it opens, but you don't know any better. So you're going towards that door. And yet when it gets pointed out very directly that precisely what the situation is, that there's no opening there and that we're looking in the wrong place, basically, then that natural intelligence kind of kicks in. I mean, it's like we're not, stupid. We have a certain innate intelligence. And so the reason that we seek happiness in the ways that we do is simply because we don't know any better. So the most important thing is just to begin to hear about a different perspective, and that can start to kind of reorient things pretty quickly. But so it's to me, it's all about a clarity of understanding, to really realize that the happiness and the peace and the truth that we're seeking truly lies within.
Well, so does this relate to what we were talking about? What's the source of suffering?
Yeah,
directly?
Yeah, because suffering really comes from a basic misunderstanding of who we are. The real root of suffering is not knowing who we are. To imagine that we're something different than we are.
Well, and isn't it also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but isn't it also imagining that door opens? Doesn't that also lead us to suffering?
Yeah, but it's, if you look at this kind of self-knowledge question, there's a couple of ways it can go. One is to a greater clarity of who we are, which leads to a kind of a peace and an understanding. The other side of the coin is being confused, having a basic misunderstanding of who we are, and imagining ourselves to be something that we're not, imagining ourselves to be a limited, small entity with, separated from the world, separated from the universe, separated from the source of happiness. None of those ideas are true, but it needs to be pointed out. We truly need to begin to consider that. But once that initial notion comes into the picture of being separate and being something small and limited, then the suffering and the seeking and the search kind of begins from that point. And so rather than working it out there, what happens is this approach pulls it right back to the very core question, which is it really true that we're a separate, limited person? Or is the truth really that what we are is this open space of clarity and awareness, like I was singing about, and so the suffering, in my view, really spins out from this basic misunderstanding. And so the radical solution on that is to look deeply into that question, who am I? And so to basically just go back to the core.
If you'd like to ask John a question, please give us a call, 1-800-490-0058. We're talking to John Wheeler, author of Awakening to the Natural State, and you're listening to Let's Get Real, and I'm your host, Allin Taylor. This is KNEW Talk 910. John, I know that I have a lot of people in my listening audience who are either traditional Christians or people who would kind of like to stay with their Christianity, but they're finding it lacking. They're finding it not really speaking to their core concerns and to their core issues, but they still have a great love for the teachings of Jesus and for Jesus the man. Is this the same truth that Jesus was talking about?
Well, I wouldn't really presume to say so, but when I look in the various traditions, whether it's Buddhism or Vedanta or Christianity, and you really get back to the core sayings, you can start to see glimmers of this kind of common understanding. And so I personally feel like the founders or the original people that were communicating their understanding, whether it be Buddha or Christ or Krishna or whoever that might be, were speaking from a direct experience of their true nature. And then the organized religions and the structured religions, those things come in the centuries following as people are trying to understand it. And typically, though, the original inspiration or the original person who was communicating that is long since dead. Mm. And all you have left are the words and the books and the memories of these teachers. And so people then come along generations later, and all they really have to work with are the words and the pointers left behind. And so it's very important, I think, to have a kind of a living contact to be able to talk about these things. Otherwise, it tends to you tend to get into the mind and into the intellect and trying to decipher it using what we talked about originally as kind of precisely the wrong instrument, which is knowing who you are is not about thinking about it. It's about truly looking and seeing for yourself.
Well, and this was what was so wonderful about you getting to experience being in Sailor Bob's presence in Australia, and this is what's so wonderful about people like you who are making yourself available at these weekly talks in Santa Cruz, and it is helpful to be in the presence, the live presence of someone who is living this.
Yeah. Well, the thing I want to say, too, though, is it's not, I don't want to put the wrong emphasis like there's something special about these teachers. They're just people. They're just bodies. They're not, it's not like you're getting something but what it is, it's just it's a pointing, it's a simple pointing. But the key to understand is that for everybody listening right now, we all exist, we all are aware this true nature that we are is shining right within everybody, and nobody can give that to you. No teacher can give that to you, no book, no path, no philosophy. The answer is what we're seeking is what we truly are. And so but if that's not clear, then we tend to go out to the recorded teachings and look to the teachers and to the books as if the answer is out there. But it really isn't. And
you just said it so beautifully, that no one can give you that. It's
no teacher. Bob Adamson can't give it. Nisargadatta can't give it. There's nobody out there that can give you the answer. They cannot give you who you are. You already are what you are.
We have Carl calling from San Mateo. Carl, do you have a question for John?
Yes, Allin. I was question and also a comment. The idea of suffering and attachment to the suffering oftentimes gives people meaning to that I am. It's like when Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And when we're talking here is the idea that I am, and that's it. I don't need to think. Am I on the right track
Yeah,
here?
whether you think or you don't think or what you think, your existence and who you are continues to shine and is present there. So, but until that's clear, and it's not difficult to see, it's actually very simple, but if that's not clear, we think of ourselves, as a person, as an entity, as a particular, individual, and we begin to attach, ideas and definitions and concepts to that in an attempt to try to solidify who we think we are. And so we begin to think like, I'm John, I'm a man, I'm a technical writer, I'm this, I'm that. And it's trying to give a certain sense of solidity to this sense of self that we have, because at the foundation we inherently feel a certain basic insecurity, that basic concept does not set right, and that's the kind of the source of the problem. So, yes, we can get into this thing where the identities and beliefs and attachments we kind of hold to because we think that they're going to make the sense of self more secure, but essentially it's a very unstable house of cards, and you can go on with that for a certain number of years, but eventually it may dawn on you that the peace and the joy and the freedom that you've been searching for may not be there. And then, something like this comes in your life, you pick up a book, you go to a talk, and you kind of get turned into a different direction, and you start to consider this whole question of suffering from a little bit different angle.
Right, and the idea of suffering in the sense that is for me, is that I don't identify with suffering, because if I am God, and we're all God, or we're all the universe, or whatever you want to use, the term you want to use, then there can be no suffering.
Yeah, ultimately, this awareness, this true being that we are, has no problem, has no inherent suffering. It is what it is, and the suffering really, when you look head on into what suffering is, it's really it's thinking, it's self-centered thinking, it's the turmoil, it's the doubts and attachments within the mind. But when you really look at that very head on, it's really just a product of thought. And when you look a little bit more closely, the thoughts that really generate suffering are the thoughts around a sense of a limited self. And it's all these are all effects of this basic idea of the belief that we are, in fact, a separate self. So when you begin to probe into that question and look at it head on and discover that's just a concept, that's not true, it has a way of unhinging the whole tree, the whole kind of, the whole expression of suffering from the root cause. And, it's very powerful. And, but a lot of people are trying to be detached, or trying to work with the appearance, or trying to work with the energy of the mind, and yet it's much more powerful to take it back to the cause. So rather than work with the effects, why not work with the root cause?
Exactly.
Because if you're not a limited separate self, and you've just simply been under misunderstanding, and you recover in your direct experience this direct knowing that you're this inherently free and open space of being, or this presence of awareness or love, then exactly what you say, you discover, amazingly, there's no suffering in it. And so it's not a matter of getting rid of suffering, it's a matter of correcting the understanding and discovering that in your true nature as you are, it is already free of suffering. So it's kind of the expressway to a life of freedom.
Carl, thank you very much for your call.
You're welcome, Alan.
You're listening to Let's Get Real on Talk 910 KNEW. I'm your host, Alan Taylor. If you have a question for John, give us a call at 1-800-490-0058. We still have a little bit more time left. John, you talk about this not having to be an abstract pursuit, but that it can have some deeper connection to whatever question it is that you set about to answer. You mean it's not all the same question?
Could you say that again? I'm not quite sure what you're getting at.
Well, it sounds like we might be going on an abstract pursuit here, but you did say something about it can be more personal than that and having a deeper connection to some deeper question that I personally set about to answer.
Oh,
I got the feeling from your book that you were saying
Yeah,
this.
people often approach me and they'll say things like, well, what is God, or what did so-and-so teacher talk about, or, some concept, what is enlightenment and what is that, and I kind of discover in talking with people that sometimes those see, the thing is, these ideas of spirituality and enlightenment and all these things, we pick them up in books. I mean, before we wandered into a bookstore, who's ever heard of enlightenment? Who's ever heard of meditation? Who's ever heard of any of these things? And so there's a way that sometimes we can be looking at those questions and overlooking some basic, more important things like, am I happy in my life? What's the source of peace? And just real more heartfelt questions, not just kind of bantering with, non-duality concepts, and that really runs dry pretty quickly. And so I find that in talking with people, the people that truly take this to heart are people that are very interested in human beings, they're interested in suffering, they're interested in being free, and they've tended to kind of step beyond this thing of just kind of acquiring kind of concepts and just kind of talking that way. And so that's why I encourage people to say, find some doorway into this that is meaningful, whether it's suffering or whether it's living a life with more freedom or being at peace or whatever, so that when you start to question and you start to look, and that it has some real depth to it, has some heart in it. It's a lot more than just an intellectual pursuit.
Okay, that answers my question. I've really got to get to this question that Ken asked me last week, because it's a really interesting question. I'm sure it's come up for you before. His question was basically, why not hedonism?
Why not hedonism? You mean just throw caution to the winds and pursue just...
Well, exactly. I mean, if we're not really, who we think we are, and there's to which we might say, well, then there's no consequence, and then there's no reality to this, or it's all an illusion, or it's all a dream. Why not hedonism?
Yeah. One of the things that you find out with this approach is that, see, a lot of people say, well, if this is what we are and it's all the oneness and stuff, then why don't we just do anything that we want to do? Is that the question?
That's exactly the question, exactly.
Well, there's kind of a misunderstanding in that, is that what this approach points out is that we don't exist as separate individuals. We don't exist as limited beings. We exist as this deeper nature of awareness itself. And in that awareness that we are, this universe and the bodies and the forms and things kind of spontaneously kind of arise, and so this whole idea of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and what should I do and why can't I do this, it's still referencing the subtle belief that we're an independent, isolated entity with some kind of existence that way. And so rather than try to say, well, what should I do or what should I not do, it's really more liberating to look directly into that sense of I, to find out, am I what I really think I am anyway? Am I a separate entity who moves through the world choosing and orchestrating everything? Because, I mean, flat out, this is basically what I'm pointing to is this kind of very radical idea that you aren't a separate entity at all.
Well, and you just said it, that it's more liberating, actually, and that's what we're looking for, is liberation. I mean, that's what the desire for hedonism is all about, is somehow going to make me feel good, and the total liberation is ultimately, I think, what we want.
And here's a little subtlety with that. if I imagine myself to be separate and limited, and I have that basic sense of separation or insecurity or doubt about myself, I can go look to do any number of things. I can become a Christian, I can become a Buddhist, I can meditate, I can become a hedonist, I can do many, many things. But until that root issue is resolved, those are all ineffectual. None of them really work because they're not truly addressing the problem, and that is it really true that I'm a limited, separate self? And so basically, none of the alternatives are particularly effective because they all overlook the most crucial question.
You're listening to Let's Get Real. I'm your host, Allin Taylor. We're speaking with John Wheeler, the author of Awakening to the Natural State. John, your book, you still have a few minutes to call, 1-800-490-0058. And, John, your book, it's available on Amazon, and you have another one coming out? Your publisher told me you did.
Oh, okay. The way that these books have come about, by the way, is I was corresponding with people through email.
I should have said that.
And posting some of these dialogues up on the website, and they kind of accumulated. And so the fellow that publishes Bob Adamson's books, I contacted him at one point, and I was helping to edit some things, and the idea came up about would he be open to publishing some of my dialogues, and he said yes, and so. That came out, and the year's worth of dialogues have been posted, and so they're coming out hopefully this fall under a book that's tentatively titled Shining in Plain View. And it's going to be a similar type of approach as the first book.
Wonderful. Well, you can get to John's website. He has one of those squirrely website names with the little tilde thing in it. So anyway, and if you Google natural state, the first 7 hits you get are for the state of Arkansas. Did you know that?
Well, if you type in the natural state and John Wheeler.
Oh yeah, of course. Then you'll get to you.
Yeah.
So you can find him, and you can also find him from my website, www.allintaylor.com, ALLINTAYLOR.com. I have a link right on my homepage and on my links page to John's homepage, and his website has a lot of great articles and great links to other websites that all address this same sort of subject we've been talking about tonight. And it also has information about his weekly meetings, but I'll just give it to you briefly now. Every Thursday evening, 7 to 8:30 p.m., John talks at the Pacific Cultural Center, which is at 1307 Seabright Avenue at Broadway, and that's in Santa Cruz. So the good news is you don't have to go to Australia. You can just go to Santa Cruz. And I met John a few weeks ago at East West Bookstore, where he was giving a book signing, and he spoke for about an hour or 2 hours, and then I spoke with him on the phone a couple of times, and 8 days later I saw what John was pointing to for me. So John, thank you very much. I'll always be grateful to you for that. You made it so simple and so easy to see. So you're going to play us out on the show tonight. We're going to close up, and thank you so much for coming up here tonight and being with us in studio. It's been wonderful to have you.
Thank you for having me.
And I hope you'll come back and be with us again and do this again. We'll have a chance for another song and some more talking.
Yeah, and I hope more and more listeners kind of dial in. It's a really nice show that you're hosting here, and the good thing is you're sharing from your experience, and you're sharing that enthusiasm and that love and that joy for this understanding, and I think that people will pick up on that who are listening. So I encourage people to stay in touch with the show and dial in and really make this an exciting place where people can really share and experience this kind of non-dual spirituality in a very living way. It's a really unique situation that Allin's creating here. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, John. That's great. If you'll give me a little instrumental background music, and you can play us out here on my closing. Thanks so much. Thanks for joining me here tonight on Let's Get Real. You can see more about the show and everything we talked about tonight on my website, www.allintaylor.com. That's ALLINTAYLOR.com. You'll find links to John's website and book and all kinds of other things on there, so go have a look. I'd like to really thank John Wheeler so much for coming up here to be with us in the studio tonight and to talk to us and to sing for us. It was just great. And I'd also like to thank my producer, Ken Ray, and I'd like to thank my callers. I'll be here next week at the same time, Sunday at 6 p.m. on Talk 910 KNEW. I'm Allin Taylor. See you next week.